If you want to understand what's happening in the Middle East, you need to understand that this is a religious war. The war in the Middle East is part of a global conflict, a war of Islamists against Hindus, Jews, and Christians with the goal of spreading Islam over the world. If you don't understand that, you won't understand what's happening in the Middle East. Let me give you just one small example. In Yemen, 2,000 kilometers from here, there is the biggest war and humanitarian crisis in the entire Middle East. And last year, one of the groups there, the Houthis, started launching rockets at Israel. Why? Why open another front and launch rockets when there are starving children? It's actually very easy to prove that this is a religious war, not a national war. But first, we have to understand why we in the West struggle to see it. If I say I don't understand physics, that's acceptable. But if I say I don't understand physics and therefore the laws of physics don't apply to me, that sounds, well, idiotic. And in some ways, that's exactly how the West behaves. The West doesn't think in religious terms, and so it assumes everyone else is just like that. The West thinks in terms of nation states, a war between Israel and Iran. Germany signed an agreement with France. The US is in a trade war with China. That's how the West thinks. But that's not how people think in the Middle East. The strongest force in the Middle East is religious. The struggle of Islamists against Christianity and Judaism in the region and across the world. And the moment you start looking at the Middle East from a religious and Islamic perspective, everything becomes much clearer. Ironically, it is often those in the West who see themselves as multicultural, as open to different ideas, who are the last to open their eyes to the fact that some people actually think differently, but not in a good way. In basic Islamic thought, the world is divided into two: Dar el-Islam, the land ruled by Islam, and Darb el-Harb, the lands that must be fought over until they too become Islamic. And we can see that clearly in the Middle East. If I ask you to summarize the last 100 years in the Middle East, what was the most important thing that happened? What would you say? As a Jew, I would say the establishment of the State of Israel. But from a broader perspective, the biggest change was the Islamization of the Middle East and the genocide of Christians. In the past 100 years, the number and percentage of Christians in the Middle East has dramatically declined. At the beginning of the 20th century, Christians made up about 20% of the region. Today, it is around 1%. In Turkey, about 3 million Christians, roughly 20-25%, lived there before World War I. Today, less than 0.5% remain due to genocides, the Assyrian genocide, Armenian genocide, and the Greek genocide, deportation, and mass immigration. In Lebanon, Christians made up about 50% of the population at the start of the century. Now it is closer to 30%. In Syria, before the civil war, Christians were about 15%. Today, it's around 2%, after decades of persecution, Islamist violence, and mass immigration. In Iraq, there were about 1.5 million Christians, about 7% of the population. Today, there are only about 300 to 500,000 left, less than 1%. Even in Egypt, home to the Coptic Christian community, the largest in the region, the percentage dropped from 20% in the early 20th century to about 10% today. There is not a single Muslim country where the percentage of Christians has risen. And by the way, the situation in Africa is even worse. Tens of thousands of Christians have been murdered by Islamist groups in Sudan, Nigeria, and Somalia. In the West, people go out of their way not to connect the dots, not to see the bigger picture. And it is not just Christians being persecuted in Muslim countries. It is also Jews. But Jews aren't being persecuted today because, well, they almost no longer exist there. The Jews were persecuted and expelled from Muslim lands. I made a video about the persecution of Moroccan Jews. I will link it below. And one of my next videos will be about the persecution of Yemenite Jews. So subscribe to the channel, it will be a special episode. But in the middle of the Islamic world, there's the state of Israel, the Jewish state. And the very existence of a Jewish state on land that was once part of an Islamic caliphate is simply unacceptable in the Muslim world. It is seen as a humiliation. Islam, from its perspective, came to replace Judaism. Jews under the Pact of Omar can live, but under heavy restriction. Each country had its own set of rules. You will see that in my videos on Jewish persecution. But the fact that the humiliated Jews established a state in territory that was once Islamic and was originally the land of the Jews, that's just too much to accept. And there are a few examples of why this conflict is religious. You have probably heard there is a war between Israel and Gaza. You have heard about it a million times. What do the Islamists, Hamas, call this war? Flood of Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa is a mosque in Jerusalem. But what's the connection? Al-Aqsa is the Arabic name for the holiest site in Judaism, the Temple Mount, where the Jewish temples once stood. 700 years after the Jewish temple was destroyed, Muslims claimed that this was the spot from which Muhammad ascended to heaven. And if you are asking yourself, wait, how could it be that Muhammad's ascension to heaven just happened to occur in the exact same spot as the Jewish temple? And more than that, Jerusalem isn't even mentioned in the Quran. How can that be? Because, like I said, Islam sees itself as replacing Judaism, and nothing makes a site holier than competition with another religion. So how does Islam prove its superiority over Judaism? By declaring that where the Jewish temples once stood is now a holy Islamic site, even though Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran. Now, believe it or not, this is not my first video. And I know there will be people who say that's not true. So here is my response. Since the 1980s, there has been an effort in the Muslim world to deny the Jewish temple ever existed in Jerusalem. But take a look at this. Here is a pamphlet published by the Waqf, the Muslim authorities in Jerusalem, from the 1960s, where they themselves wrote that this is the site where Solomon's temple stood. But this isn't a history class. This video is meant to show you that this conflict is religious. Even the name of this war, Flood of Al-Aqsa, is deeply religious. And who launched it? Hamas. What is Hamas? It stands for Islamic Resistance Movement. What's in their logo? The Dome of the Rock, the building Muslims erected on the sites of the Jewish temple. Now, as a tour guide, I love to talk, but I also have a remarkable ability to listen, truly listen. So I read the Hamas charter. Think about it. How many times have you heard commentators talk about Hamas? A million times. And how many times have they told you what Hamas says about itself in its founding documents? Probably zero. I will link it below, but here are a few insights. The word Islam appears 136 times. Why? Because it is a religious organization. Article 8. Allah is its target. The Prophet is its model. The Quran is its constitution. Jihad is the path, and death for the sake of Allah is the loftiest of its wishes. To die for Allah, that's their highest goal. Don't dismiss it. Believe them. This is what they teach their children. This is what mothers wish for their children.
خلق للسعادة فأنت في نظري مشروع للشهادة وسلاحنا إسلامنا وذخيرتنا أبناؤنا فأنت يا بني مشروع للشهادة.
كبيرة من البنات والبنين كان الرد جميل نحن ننجب هؤلاء بكثرة لندفعهم حتى للموت.
And what do they say about peace? Article 13. Initiatives in so-called peaceful solution and international conferences are in contradiction to the principle of the Islamic resistance movement. Abusing any part of Palestine is abuse directed against part of religion. The phrase Palestinian state doesn't appear anywhere in the charter. Strange, right? Not really, because like I said, we in the West think in terms of states, but they think in terms of religious war. And so far I've talked about one group, Hamas. Let's look at the names of their friends. Islamic Jihad. The name explains itself. Jihad means war against the infidels, those who don't believe in Allah. Hezbollah, the name means party of God. And what does it say on the flag of the Houthis in Yemen? What do you think? Free Yemen? Maybe justice, peace, and brotherhood? Let's take a look. In green, it says Allahu Akbar, God is great, and victory to Islam. In red, it says death to America, death to Israel, curse upon the Jews. Now do you understand why they are firing rockets at Israel from Yemen? Because the existence of Israel, a state for Jews, bothers them more than the fact that thousands of Yemenite children are dying of hunger. Like I said, in every Muslim country in the Middle East, the number of Christians is collapsing, while in Western Europe, the number of Muslims is rising. And sometimes I ask myself, are these videos I'm making even changing anything? Because I talk about the Middle East far away, but you can see what I talk about in London, Paris, Berlin, Wisconsin, and Amsterdam. Thousands of Muslims, born and raised in the most liberal cities in the world, went to join ISIS, the Islamic Caliphate. Most of the terrorist attacks in Europe were committed by, how many bad Jewish settlers committed terror attacks in Europe? 0. Same in the United States. 0 Jewish settlers committed attacks. But to me, something is even more disturbing than terrorism. It's the explanatory memorandum by Muslim Brotherhood, written by a member of Hamas. Yes, Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood umbrella, and in it he defined the Brotherhood strategic goal in the United States. The process of settlement is civilization jihadist process. It is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands. We must understand that our work in America is a kind of grand jihad. The Muslim brothers must plan and struggle to obtain the keys and the tools to the process, such as schools, the education system, and the media. And that's exactly what they are doing, the education system and the media. Why do American students came out in masses to protest in favor of Hamas after October 7th? They don't protest the wars in Yemen and Syria. They don't protest women's oppression in Iran or Egypt. They don't protest LGBT rights in Muslim countries. But they do protest for a global intifada because for years they've been fed anti-American and anti-Israel propaganda. Pause this video right now and go check Al Jazeera. 90% of the headlines will be against Israel and against America. There won't be any criticism of human rights in Muslim countries. How do I know what the headlines will be? Simple, because they are not reporting news. They are pushing anti-Western, anti-American, and anti-Israel ideology. Al Jazeera, owned by Qatar, is just another arm of the Muslim Brotherhood. The rockets from Iran and the headlines from Al Jazeera, Qatar, they are part of the same religious war. And once you understand that, as difficult and uncomfortable as it may be, you will finally understand what's happening in the world. Follow me for more. And if you don't agree with my analysis, feel free to comment and tell me where I'm wrong. I'm from Israel, not from a Muslim country, so I truly support freedom of speech. And I think it is important to listen to the other side. See you in the next videos. Yalla bye.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that certainly the disbelievers, they are distraught by the fact that your deen is superior. Allahu Akbar. Islam is the last hope for America. Oh, dear America, if you are looking for preservation, the way that you treat Muslims around the world will dictate the longevity of your empire. You cannot sustain morals without Islam, and Islam is the one true religion that will preserve morals.
مثلا في 2050 يعني سيكون مثلا عدد المسلمين في فرنسا أكثر من الفرنسيين، ولكن نحن يعني خلينا نقول لا نعول على أن مثل هذه الأرقام هي التي ستحول هذا البلد إلى بلد إسلامي. يدخلون في دين الله عز وجل أفواجا من خلال دولة تحمل تحمل الإسلام عن طريق الجهاد في سبيل الله عز وجل، تحمل هذه الرسالة وهذه الرحمة إلى الناس. فإذا القضية بأنه سينشر سلطان الإسلام على العالم كله بإحدى ثلاث: الإسلام أو الجزية أو نستعين بالله عز وجل ونقاتلهم حتى يخضع العالم جميعا.
أخبرنا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بحديث صحيح وبشرنا بفتح القسطنطينية وروما. علاج مشكلة بلاد الشام بشكل نهائي بعد إقامة الخلافة والقضاء على كيان يهود يكون بفتح أوروبا. لابد أن يصبح هذا البحر المتوسط كله بجميع شواطئه وضفافه يجب أن يصبح إسلامي خالص، وأن يتحقق بذلك وعد النبي وبشرى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بفتح روما. لابد أن تغزى أوروبا، لابد أن تعاد الكرة، لابد من طارق جديد يركب البحر ويعبر ذلك المضيق ويحرر الأندلس ويعيدها إلى حضن الإسلام. ولابد من عثمانيون جدد يدخلون بلاد البلقان ويعيدونها إلى دار الإسلام وإلى حضن الإسلام. ولا بد من جيش أبي مؤمن تقي يتوجه من شمال أفريقيا بإذن الله تعالى نحو روما ليفتحها، وبالتالي من خلال ذلك نكون قد قمنا بالواجب الشرعي وهو واجب الجهاد في سبيل الله لإعلاء كلمته ورفع رايته وتحقيق سيادة شرعه في العالم أجمع. فالجهاد يوجب فتح أوروبا، الجهاد يوجب فتح أوروبا. وقاتلوهم حتى لا تكون فتنة ويكون الدين كله لله.